r/AskReddit posted by user/anthem29. Serious, hikers, campers, woodsmen and the like, what are your scariest experiences in the woods? My buddies and I were camping in the woods in Yosemite, California. We were the only ones in the area, and we knew this because of the camping registry. We were quite literally the only ones in a 20-mile radius. Anyways, everything was great and normal, and our campsite was on the side of a lake. At night, we all shared an 8-man tent. It was cozy with 8 guys in a tent, but not horrible. Anyways, at about 3 AM the first night, we were all suddenly awoken by one member of our group standing up in the tent and frantically opening the tent door. He poked his head out and began super frantically and nervously saying, "There's someone in our camp." He kept repeating it and sounded absolutely terrified. Needless to say, we were ducking horrified that someone might be in our camp because we knew that we were supposed to be alone. Everyone who had just been woken up was looking at each other with mortified looks on our faces. After about 15 seconds of saying that someone was in our camp, he laid back down like nothing had happened and slept. The methodica was sleepwalking, and there was no one in the camp. It was hard to fall back asleep. I was camping in PA with someone from West Coast once. We were sitting around the fire talking, and he looks up and gets really quiet and says he sees someone coming towards us. We hadn't seen anyone not he trail in the 3 days we'd been out so far, and the trail log didn't show anyone else on the trail either. After a bit he says he can't see them anymore. This happens a few times. Every 2 minutes he would say he can see someone coming towards us up the trail, then saying he can't see them, and we can't hear any footsteps and nobody has even walked by us. Eventually he tries to point them out to us. "See the light over there? It's like a headlamp flashing as they pass trees." Turns out he was seeing lightning bugs for the first time and was mistaking one for a hiker's headlamp. We had a good laugh over that. He was amazed at the lightning bugs. I even caught one so he could get a close look at it. I have a similar story. Myself and a friend were on a 7-week trip from LA to New York, where we always stayed in the same room. Everything was fine for the first 3-ish weeks until we got to a hotel in Miami that had an adjoining door to the next room that was occupied by strangers. So anyway, after a good night out, we got back to the hotel at probably 2 AM and basically went straight to bed. I fell asleep immediately because we had been getting up at 5 and leaving at 6, so I was tired. About an hour passes and all of a sudden I'm jerked awake by my friend yelling, "Get the duck out," several times. I sit straight up, heart beating out of my chest, and see she is standing at the end of my bed staring at the adjoining door. I look away for a second and turn back to turn on the desk lamp, and when I look back she is now awake, focused on her luggage and folding her clothes, and I'm like, "What the actual duck, love? You were just screaming." And she was like, "What?" It freaked me the fuck out. To this day, I have no idea the entirety of what actually happened, and I have a bunch of questions without answers because she can't remember. Like, did she fall asleep folding clothes, or was there a noise to make her think someone was in the room? Went turkey hunting with my dad in the Shawnee National Forest several years ago. I was about 10. Took one afternoon to hike and scout hunting spots. Along the trail we saw a few blood splatters and drips, but not big deal. It's nature. About 1/4 mile up the trail, however, we come up to 3 dogs hanging from a tree, gutted, bled out, and skinned. Okay, now that was pretty weird and scary. We kept going a bit further as there was a bluff not too far up the way that was pretty cool to look at. Come to the bluff, find weird symbols burned into the ground, and on the sides of the rock wall, candle wax absolutely everywhere and more blood all over the ground. By that time my dad, whom I've never seen scared in my life, looked at me and said, "Let's go," and we took off at a pretty quick pace back to the camp. The worst part is that we didn't leave the campsite, so that night I laid awake in the camper freaking out at every sound I heard. Still get goosebumps thinking about that event to this day. Bedded down for the night on my tarp. A few minutes later heard some rustling coming from my immediate left. Turned on my flashlight to see a bear's ass literally 2 feet from my nose, using one of its front paws, and faced a rifle through my pack. I'd like to say I let out a manly war cry to scare it away, brown bear, but it came out more of a hoo-hoo. Bear scampers forward, trips on the pack, face plants into a fallen log, looks back at me like it's my fault, then runs off. Then another time, an elk stepped on me while I was asleep. Hurt like a mother. Fortunately didn't pierce my wrap canvas. I yelled in pain. Elk gave one of those whistle bugle cries and stomped off. That was scarier than the bear. If it had stomped on me, I'd have a minimum of a few broken ribs. At night at my fire, getting ready to cook up some food, this damn coyote, I think, was kinda dark, sneaks up, grabs my food bag, and just runs off with it. I didn't see it until he had the satchel in his mouth, so I take off after it. It drops the sack under some trees, runs a bit further, and turns around to watch me. As I stop to grab my food, I hear more coyotes from in front of me, close, and to the right. First one was still looking at me. Didn't sleep much that night. As I understand it, brown bears are unlikely to engage with humans unless provoking the bear, coming between it and its food or it and its cubs. One time in a small New England town, one general store, one gas station, one bed and breakfast, I was walking around the corner and came upon a brown bear walking toward me on the sidewalk. Upon seeing me, it turned and walked away as if he had seen someone he recognized but didn't want to converse, and walked off around the far corner of the building. I turned to retreat, which brought me to where I could see the side of the building where a guy was washing his car, not knowing that a bear was about to walk up on him. When he stuck his head up, the bear saw him and retreated back around the building to where he had encountered me. Sure as shit, he rumbles around the corner at a good clip coming directly towards me, but he had forgotten I was there. When he saw me, he let out a sound like a bark, almost, and his eyes went wide. He skidded to a halt and his legs twisted as he turned, stumbling quickly away into the woods. TL. Doctor, the whole thing was like a scene from Scooby-Doo, and Car Wash Guy and I were spooky monsters, but instead of a big dumb dog trying to escape us, a bear. I post this story every time this question comes up. I enjoy reliving it as I comment. When I was about 13, my parents and I took a trip to Yellowstone National Park. While hiking a trail, we heard a huge crash and a loud scream. "Watch out," were the words yelled out from someone not in sight on the trail ahead. Hundreds of buffalo appeared crashing through the trees coming towards us. Executing our natural flight response to this dismal turn of events, we ran as fast as we could through the woods. I tripped at one point and will remember screaming out to my mother, who was already there to help me out. My father yelled to us to follow him as he started running up the hill on the other side of the path. 5 seconds later, we saw the herd of buffalo passing us. Turns out if you are ever being chased by a herd of buffalo, you should run uphill, because the herd will naturally go downhill. We went to a diner right after that for lunch and I ordered a buffalo burger. Gave me a sense of victory. I haven't had anything too serious, but at a park here in Colorado I once saw a sign that said mountain lions are common here, but don't worry, you won't see them. That unnerved me a bit. Later that night, sitting around the campfire, and suddenly my German Shepherd bolts up and just stares into the darkness. Dude, stop that. There's a trail my friend and I like to hike at night just for fun. We've seen elk run around the area, but the worst animal we've seen is a coyote. Nothing too big. We bring our buddy's dog. He's a big sheepdog. Comes when he's called. Good boy. Anyway, we are walking this trail one night, and his dog stops, looks ahead of us, stares, and runs back to the car. We took his advice and stopped the hike there. I was at a lake in the woods fishing with my 4-year-old kid and wife. There was nobody there except us. The lake was surrounded by a dense forest of trees, bush and the like. We were about 50 yards from our vehicle down a hill at the bank with our poles resting in the water. The fishing was slow, so I decided to test out my new camera. So I walked around the general area while my wife sat with our child and tended the fishing poles. I walked up a hill from the bank and through the dense trees to the mouth of a clearing, where all of a sudden I see 4 guys approximately 20 yards away just out there in the woods. They looked like a cross between grunge band members and deep woods hillbillies. I don't know, they were dirty, had unwashed looking raggedy hair and clothes. We were in the boondocks, so they just stood there looking at me for what seemed like a good solid 2 or 3 minutes, the look in this one's eyes of either desperation or no malevolent intentions. I played it off and just focused my camera in a different direction. Then I noticed that one of them had somehow managed to move closer to where I was at, and I immediately felt really uneasy. I mean, why in the hell were these guys out here so far in the middle of nowhere? No fishing poles, no hiking gear, nothing. The one that had moved closer to where I was at said out of the blue, "Hey, won't you come and take our picture?" Then he kinda half giggled, revealing rotted looking mouth. He had as much teeth as a jack-o'-lantern. Not to judge this guy, just looked very sketchy, and I could definitely feel his intentions were not good. I kinda smiled back nervously and just kinda nodded and started making my way back to my family and the fishing spot. As I walked away, I heard one of the ones in the distance holler, "Hey man, come over here, we want you to take our picture." And then heard the others laughing, and I noticed they were slowly making their way towards my direction. They were talking amongst themselves and laughing sinisterly. I could not make out what they were saying that good at this point, as I was causally but quickly leaving the area. I did make out a few comments like, "Yeah, I think he's alone," and another say, "Nah, something, his car's right over that way." Anyway, I finally made it back down to the bank and immediately told my wife to quickly start gathering our shit and head back to the car. She could tell by the sound of my voice and demeanor that something was wrong. We both half-heartedly packed up, grabbed the kid and headed up the bank/hill to where our vehicle was at, point still the only other people out there. Right as we got to the car, I noticed, and my wife saw for the first time, what I was getting away from. They were in the distance coming out of the woods and heading right towards us. We threw our shit in the back, jumped in the car, and started heading out. I didn't want to worry my wife, but had the realization that there was only one way out of there, an old dirt road that meandered through the woods and passed near where they were at. I was afraid we might get cut off, so I floored it and just thought, I will not stop for nothing. As we were making our way out, I had seen something to the right out of my peripheral vision, and yep, it was one of them in full stride running towards us. This time I noticed he had something in his right hand that looked like an elongated tire iron or something. We lost them in the woods just about as they made it to the road. A while later, maybe 30 minutes, we made to the old country concrete highway that lead back to the city. At this point we seen another vehicle in the distance coming in our direction, a beat up old work truck. I thought, oh yucking shit, they caught a US. Then as the vehicle approached, we got a much better look at the occupants. An old couple, and the husband looked like an old lumberjack type, definitely looked like he could take care of himself. They slowed down as they approached, rolled down the window, and he asked if everything was okay and if we were lost. I said no, we know how to get back to the main highway from here. I told them about what had happened back there, and he didn't even seem phased. Just said that we should not be out here alone, there's been some stories. I didn't ask, and then he said that he never comes out here without his rifle and his Nam knife. I'm assuming Vietnam military knife. Anyway, we thanked them and got the hell out of there, never to return. Camping in general can be freaky. Not so much during the day, but when it gets dark, it gets dark. Whenever people say the Blair Witch Project wasn't scary, I always ask them if they've ever been camping. If you have, then that movie probably freaks you the duck out. Laying in your tent at night not knowing what is 3 feet away from you is terrifying. It's pitch black and quiet, like being alone in a creaky old house, except with a ×10 multiplier. Every sound could be a bear, wolf, or person out to get you, and if you're in a tent you can't see what's out there. Probably my freakiest experience happened when I was a kid and went camping in Colorado. It was dark, but still too early for us to be tired, so we were just sitting around the fire doing the do. Talking, eating s'mores, whatever. I would say we were telling scary stories, but duck that. We were probably talking about Disney movies or some shit. Now keep in mind how dark it is out there. The light from the fire only goes out so far, and it creates like this wall where all light stops. We were sitting there when all of a sudden my sister looked up and saw a pair of eyes looking at us. Me and my sister started freaking out. We were like right on the edge of lose our minds, scared. Our parents calmed us down and told us not to move. We had no idea what it was. It was nearly impossible to judge how big it was. So we just sat there and waited for it to go away, which it did. It was probably a raccoon or some shit, but 6-year-old me was pretty sure it was the chupacabra. Not too interesting of a story, but definitely freaked us out. My dad admits to this day he wasn't scared, but notoriously has never been able to handle scary movies on any level. I call bullshit, Dad. You were scared. I was hiking the Appalachian Trail northbound in early August a few years ago, and I was a day out of Davenport Gap heading to Hot Springs, North Carolina. I don't remember the exact shelter I was at, but I know it was north of Maximum Patch. That time of year, there aren't many people on the trail, and other than a couple cars at Maximum Patch, I hadn't seen or spoken to another person in a full day. I decided to end my hike for the day at about 7 p.m. so I could eat dinner and prepare for bed before dark. I was also filming a little diary of my hike as a gift for my sister. I ate, filmed, reloaded on my water, and hit the hay right as it got dark and the crickets came out. At about 2:30 a.m. I was startled awake, but not by a noise, rather the absolute silence around me. I didn't hear the totes, crickets, owls that you'd expect to hear, and that I had heard when I had gone to sleep just 6 hours earlier. I looked around, but saw nothing. Everything was perfectly still. I made the decision that I had to get the fuck out of there. I packed all my gear in about 5 minutes, threw on my headlamp, grabbed my bear bag and noped my way up the trail. I'm pretty sure I averaged 4 miles per hour in the pitch black until sunrise. Because of such an early departure, I finished my planned 18 miles into Hot Springs by 10 a.m., which was nice. To this day I have no idea what was there that morning, but I know something was there. I've encountered tons of predators in the woods, from black bears to coyotes, but I've never experienced that calm like that before. Made me think maybe it was some sort of large cat, or worse, some crazy person. Who knows what would have happened had I stayed until sunrise. Maybe nothing, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. This one is not as good, but what the hell. I was doing a long hike from Springer MTN to Fontana Dam, about 165 miles. I was a little behind schedule on day 3, where I had planned to take a near zero day and spend some time at mountain crossings. Initially I was going to spend night 2 in the hostel there, but a big storm prevented me from crossing Blood Mountain the day before. As a result, I had to revamp my plan and add about 7 miles to my day. So after a soda and a burger at mountain crossings, I hit the trail again. I come to a road crossing, and there's this guy with an old 80s style external frame pack, taking a break. Being me, I stopped, pulled out a Cliff Bar and a smoke, and decided to have a conversation for a bit. I could use the break anyway. We talked for a bit, and I alluded to which shelter I was headed to. Do not do this if you don't trust the person. That was my first mistake. The guy seemed a little odd, but this was the everyone is weird. At that point we are all walking to Maine. We started talking about 1 p.m. He had started his day at Neal's Gap, and I started on the other side of Blood Mountain. We had started at roughly the same time, and I had taken a 2-hour break. My pace easily put me ahead of this guy by 7 or 8 miles. The shelter I had alluded to was actually out of his range, or so I thought. There were also, if I remember correctly, 3 shelters between us and my final destination. We parted ways, and I kept on trucking. I get to camp and do my usual thing. I made good time, so I actually had quite a bit of downtime before hike midnight, 8 p.m. Several hours had passed. I had prepped for the night and was reworking my plan while talking to other hikers, and this guy rolls into camp looking like he had just gone on the Baton Death March. He trucked it to catch up with me. The guy started to show his true colors in camp. He was really loud and obnoxious and would just not leave me alone. I decided that night that I would carry a bit of extra water and do breakfast outside of camp to try and distance myself from him. The next morning, I was up just before sunrise. I packed and hit the trail. A few miles up, I stopped for breakfast like planned. Not 1 or 2 miles later, I tweaked my knee on some rocks crossing, I think, Trey MTN. That did it. I needed to get some rest and ice this thing. I go to the Gap, where you can either hitch west into Hiawassee, where most people go, or hitch east into Helen. I decided to go into Helen, as I figured I'd also take advantage of the Bavarian atmosphere that the town provides. Lo and behold, a few hours later this same guy comes rolling into my hotel. I found out later that he had asked some southbounders about me and figured out where I went. Holy fuck, I thought. Now this is creepy. I had to get this guy away from me. I figured while in town I'd kill him with kindness. So I got some beers and made some more conversation. We were talking about our plans, and I knew this was my chance. I told him that because of my knee, I was probably going to take the next day off as well and continue on after that. He said he'd join me, just like I expected. I said cool and went to my room. As soon as I got to my room, I packed up and set my alarm for 4:30 AM. I phoned the owner of the hotel to make sure she could give me a ride to the trail that early. The next morning, I quietly grabbed my gear and hopped in her car. We headed the few miles up the road to the trailhead, and I basically started running. I never saw the guy again, but I heard stories about him up trail. That was a hell of a trip though. Not 2 days later, I had a bear bed down within arm's reach of me in my tent. That's a story for a different thread, though, as it wasn't creepy, but comforting in a weird way. I haven't done a long hike in a few years. Telling these really makes me want to get back on the trail. I think I will this summer. If you like what I'm doing, consider subscribing to Reddit Thief for more Reddit TTS. Have a nice day.